My dad left me at 5 and gave his life to a new wife. Now my stepmom tries to steal my inheritance. But what I did next turned her world upside down. I'm 25 years old, work full-time, and currently live with my grandma. I've been with her for as long as I can remember. My mom passed away when I was really young, so it's just been me and my grandparents for most of my life. My dad, well, he pretty much vanished after my mom died when I was 5. He left me with my grandparents and just disappeared. I have no brothers or sisters, no one else to turn to, just my grandma and grandpa. I used to ask all the time, when is Dad coming back? My grandma would always smile, kind of sadly, and tell me not to worry. Eventually I got it, he wasn't coming back. So yeah, it's been me and them ever since. My grandparents were in their 50s when they took me in. They weren't rich or anything, but they were the best. They made sure I never felt like I was missing out on anything. I wasn't spoiled, but they got me what I needed and worked hard to make sure I had a good life. Grandma was a tough one, always working odd jobs, whether it was at the local grocery store or cleaning houses. She never complained, always smiling, always taking care of me. I still remember how proud I felt when I started school. My grandma saved up enough to buy me this cute little backpack with cartoon characters on it. It was bright pink, and I think I wore it out in about a month from carrying it around everywhere, even when I wasn't in school. I know it wasn't easy for them to get me nice stuff like that, but they always found a way. That's just how they were. As I got older, I started to realize how hard they were working to keep everything together. My grandpa, before he got sick, had a regular job at the post office. He was quiet, but you could tell he loved me, even though he wasn't the type to show it with words. I'd catch him sneaking candy into my lunchbox, or letting me watch TV past bedtime when Grandma wasn't looking. He didn't talk much, but he showed he cared in little ways like that. By the time I was in high school, things were starting to get more complicated. School was a big deal to me. I was always good with school stuff. Studying, doing homework, all that. And I had this dream to go to a really good high school. Not just any public school, but one of the top ones. It felt like the only way out of the situation we were in. Like I needed to do something with my life to make everything worth it. I remember this conversation I had with my grandma when I was in middle school. We were sitting at the table, eating dinner, and she just kind of casually said, "You know, Jenny, don't stress too much about going to a public high school. Choose the one you like." I didn't really get it at the time, but now, looking back, I know she was worried about the money. Private schools were expensive, and even though they never let on, I knew they were struggling. So, I said, "But what about you and Grandpa? Isn't it going to be tough if I go to a private school?" She just smiled and shook her head. "We'll manage," she said. "We've got some savings." That's how she always was, trying to make everything seem okay, even when it wasn't. I wasn't dumb, though. I knew they were doing everything for me, so I made a promise to myself that I was going to work hard and get into the best public high school I could. I wasn't going to let them spend more money they didn't have. I studied like crazy, late nights, early mornings, flashcards everywhere. When the entrance exam came, I nailed it and got accepted into one of the best public high schools around. I'll never forget the look on my grandparents' faces when I told them. My grandpa, who barely ever said a word, got up from his chair, came over to me, and gave me this big, tight hug. I swear it was the first time I'd ever seen him cry. They were so proud of me. I think that was the first time I really felt like I was doing something right, like I was paying them back for everything they had done for me. Grandpa even booked a table at this nice restaurant in town to celebrate. We didn't do things like that often, so it was a big deal. I felt like the luckiest girl in the world that day. But high school wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. A couple of years in, things started to change. I'd come home after school, and the house felt different, like this cloud was hanging over everything. I remember walking into the kitchen one day and seeing my grandma sitting at the table, her head in her hands. I asked her what was wrong, and she looked up at me with these tired eyes and said, "Grandpa's sick." I didn't know what to say. I mean, what do you say to that? I was just a teenager, and I didn't really understand how serious it was at first. But it got bad, really bad. Grandpa was in and out of the hospital, and every time he came home, he looked worse than before. He stopped working, and Grandma had to pick up more hours at her jobs just to keep things running. I felt so helpless. I couldn't do anything to fix it. I tried to keep up with school, but it was hard to focus when all I could think about was what was happening at home. I'd stay up late studying, but also worrying about whether Grandpa would be okay. Grandma, she was always so strong, but I could see the cracks. She was exhausted. There were days when she'd come home from work, sit down on the couch, and just stare at the wall for what felt like forever before she'd get up to make dinner. I started helping out more, doing whatever I could, cooking, cleaning, whatever needed to be done. I didn't want her to worry about me on top of everything else. She'd always tell me, "Don't worry, Jen, focus on your school. You've got a bright future ahead." But how could I focus on school when it felt like everything around me was falling apart? Grandpa's condition kept getting worse. It was like this slow, painful decline. One day he'd be okay, and the next he'd be back in the hospital. I hated it. Hated seeing him like that. Hated seeing Grandma so worn out, and hated that I couldn't do anything to make it better. That's when things really started to hit me. Life wasn't going to be easy, it wasn't going to be fair, and it definitely wasn't going to be what I expected. Things got worse after Grandpa's diagnosis. It wasn't something I could ignore anymore, and honestly, I didn't want to. Every time I walked into the house, it felt heavier, like this weight I couldn't shake off. Grandpa wasn't just sick, he was getting worse fast, and I didn't know how to deal with it. I was a teenager, and I'd never seen someone I loved just fade like that. Grandma tried to keep it together, but I could see the cracks. She didn't complain, but she didn't have to. You could just tell. There were days she'd come home from work, her shoulders all slumped, like the weight of the world was on her. She'd smile at me, ask about school, make dinner like she always did, but it wasn't the same. We both knew it. Grandpa was in and out of the hospital so much I couldn't even keep track of the appointments anymore. Some days he'd be there for a week, other times, just a few days. But each time he came back, he looked worse. It was like watching someone slowly disappear. He used to be this strong, quiet man, and now he was weak, tired, and couldn't even get out of bed half the time. It was tough to see. I wanted to help, but what could I do? I was just a kid. Grandma was the one holding everything together, or at least trying to. She started taking on even more part-time jobs. It wasn't just about paying bills anymore. There were hospital costs, medication, everything. Even though Grandpa had insurance, it didn't cover everything. I didn't really understand the financial part of it back then, but I knew we were struggling. I could hear her late at night, talking on the phone with the hospital, trying to figure out payment plans, arguing with them sometimes. I tried to step up and help out more around the house. I'd make dinner if she was late. I'd clean, do laundry, anything I thought might take some of the pressure off. I even got a part-time job at the local store to bring in a little extra cash. It wasn't much, but it was something. But no matter what I did, it didn't feel like enough, and honestly, it wasn't. How could it be? The worst part was seeing Grandpa like that. I'd come home from school and go straight to his room to check on him. Some days he'd be asleep, other days he'd be sitting up trying to act like everything was fine. He'd tell me stories or try to crack a joke, but even that was fading. There was this one day I'll never forget. I walked into his room, and he looked up at me with this weak smile and said, "Jenny, I'm sorry." I didn't know what to say. Sorry for what? For being sick? For not being able to be the grandpa I remembered? I just sat there with him, holding his hand, not knowing what to say because nothing I could say would fix it. As time went on, things just kept getting harder. Grandpa had retired by then, and it was all on Grandma to keep us afloat. I could see how tired she was, but she never let on. She'd say, "Don't worry, Jenny, I'm fine," but she wasn't. She was running herself into the ground, and I knew it. There were days when she'd come home from work, and I could tell she'd been crying, but she'd never admit it. That wasn't her style. And then there was the hospital. It felt like every other day there was some new complication with Grandpa's health. The doctors would explain things to me, but I didn't understand half of it. I just knew it wasn't good. One night, Grandma and I went to visit him, and he was hooked up to all these machines. He was barely awake, and when he saw us, he tried to smile, but he couldn't. That's when it hit me, like really hit me, that he wasn't going to get better. I didn't know how to deal with that. How do you prepare yourself for losing someone you've lived with your whole life, someone who's been there every day, even if they weren't the loud, talkative type? I felt like I was losing my whole foundation. I'd go to school, trying to focus, trying to act like everything was normal, but it wasn't. My friends didn't really get it. They'd ask, "How's your grandpa?" And I'd just say, "He's okay," because what else could I say? No one my age was dealing with this stuff. They were worried about grades or what they were doing over the weekend, and here I was, worrying about whether my grandpa would make it through the night. Grandma started talking about applying for assistance from the government. We'd always been able to manage, but now we needed help. I didn't know much about how that worked, but I could tell she didn't want to do it. She was proud, and asking for help wasn't in her nature, but we didn't have a choice. I remember the day she went to the city office to apply. She came home with this big stack of papers, all these forms she had to fill out, and I could see the frustration in her eyes. "It's confusing," she said, sitting at the table, staring at all the paperwork. I sat down with her and helped as much as I could, but it felt overwhelming. Eventually we got through it, and a few weeks later we got the approval. I thought that would make things easier, but it didn't. It just made everything feel more real. We were now officially on assistance, and that felt like a loss in itself. As Grandpa's condition got worse, I could see the toll it was taking on Grandma. She was still working, still doing everything she could, but it wasn't enough. It never was. There was one night, after Grandpa had another bad episode, where she just broke down. I'd never seen her like that. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands covering her face, and just cried. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay, but I couldn't because I didn't believe that myself. We were running on empty, and it felt like no matter how hard we tried, we were just sinking deeper. I was scared. Scared for Grandpa, scared for Grandma, and honestly scared for myself. What would happen if we lost him? How would we manage? I had all these questions swirling around in my head and no answers. Then, one day, after Grandpa had been in the hospital for a few days, we got the call. I don't remember who answered it, but I remember the silence that followed, the kind of silence where you just know something bad has happened. Grandpa had passed away. I didn't cry at first. I just stood there, numb, like my brain couldn't process it. He was gone, just like that. And everything we'd been holding on to, all the hope that maybe he'd get better, was gone too. That night, Grandma sat with me on the couch. She didn't say much, just held my hand, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like a kid again, a scared, lost kid who didn't know what the future held. After Grandpa passed, everything felt strange. The house was too quiet, too empty. He had been sick for a while, but somehow we always hoped he'd come home again. When that didn't happen, I think both Grandma and I just felt kind of lost. It's not like we talked about it or anything, but the way we moved around the house, avoiding certain rooms, staying busy, it was obvious. I threw myself into work. I had graduated high school by then and had to put off college to help out at home. There was no way I was going to leave Grandma alone, especially not after everything she'd done for me. So, I found a full-time job at a local store. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and that's what we needed at the time. Grandma, though, she was the one I worried about. She didn't complain, she never did, but I could see how tired she was. She was still working her part-time jobs even after everything, and I knew she felt guilty. One day I came home from work and found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of bills like they were about to jump up and bite her. I sat down across from her. "What's wrong?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. She just sighed and shook her head. "It's these bills, Jenny. We're managing, but barely. I'm just so tired." I didn't know what to say. I mean, I was tired too, but I wasn't going to say that. I had to step up. "Don't worry, Grandma. I'm working full-time now, remember? We'll get through this." She gave me a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're too young to be worrying about bills. This isn't the life I wanted for you." That hit me hard. I could tell she felt guilty, like she'd somehow failed me, but I didn't see it that way. She and Grandpa had raised me, given me everything they could, and now it was my turn to help. I wasn't going to let her carry all that guilt. "Grandma, you did everything for me. I wouldn't be where I am without you, and Grandpa, don't think for a second this is your fault." She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. After that, I made it my mission to work harder, take on more shifts, do whatever I could to make sure she didn't have to worry so much. It wasn't easy, but it was what I had to do. A few months went by, and things started to settle into a routine: work, bills, sleep, repeat. It wasn't much of a life, but it was ours. Then, one day, out of nowhere, we got a phone call. It was weird because nobody ever called us. I answered, and on the other end was this woman I didn't recognize. "Hello, is this Jennifer?" she asked. "Yeah, who's this?" There was a pause, and then she said, "I'm your father's wife." My stomach dropped. My father? I hadn't heard from him in, 20 years? And now, all of a sudden, his wife was calling me? I didn't even know he was married. "Okay," I said slowly, not sure what to expect. "I'm sorry to tell you this, but your father passed away in a car accident." I didn't feel anything. I mean, what was I supposed to feel? The guy had abandoned me when I was a kid, and now I was supposed to care that he was dead? "I see," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She kept talking, but I barely listened. Something about the accident, the funeral, blah blah. It wasn't until she said something about inheritance that I snapped back to attention. "Inheritance?" I repeated. "Yes," she said, and I could hear the tension in her voice. "He left behind some assets, and as his biological child, you have a claim to them." Now I was confused. This man hadn't been in my life for years, and suddenly I was entitled to his money? It didn't feel real. I didn't even want anything from him. Why would I? But then she said something that really rubbed me the wrong way. "Would you consider giving up your inheritance rights? It would make things easier for us. I mean, for me. We don't have any kids, and your claim complicates things." I couldn't believe it. She didn't even try to hide what this was about. It wasn't about my father's memory or closure or anything like that. It was about money, and not for me, but for her. She wanted me to just walk away, pretend like I didn't exist, so she could have it all to herself. "No," I said firmly. There was a pause. "No, that's right," I said, my voice stronger now. "I'm not giving up anything. I didn't even know about this inheritance, but now that I do, I'm not just going to give it up because it's convenient for you." She didn't like that answer. But you didn't even have a relationship with him. What difference does it make to you? That hit a nerve. You're right, I said. I didn't have a relationship with him. He left me with my grandparents and disappeared. But that doesn't mean I don't deserve what's rightfully mine. I could hear her fuming on the other end of the line. This isn't fair, she muttered. I don't care if it's fair to you, I snapped. He was my father, whether he acted like it or not, and I have a right to whatever he left behind. She hung up after that. I sat there for a few minutes trying to process what had just happened. I hadn't thought about my father in years, and now, all of a sudden, his death was bringing all this drama into my life. I told Grandma about the call, and she wasn't surprised. I always knew your father was selfish, she said, but this, trying to take everything for herself, that's low, even for him. We decided to consult a lawyer, just to make sure we knew what we were getting into. I wasn't sure how much money we were talking about, but it didn't matter. I wasn't going to back down, not after everything we'd been through. I wasn't about to let some stranger, someone who didn't even know me, take something that, for once, was supposed to be mine. After the phone call with my dad's wife, things escalated fast. It wasn't just about my inheritance claim anymore. It became this weird battle between me, someone who hadn't even seen her father in over 2 decades, and his second wife, who clearly wanted everything for herself. I wasn't trying to be greedy, but the way she came at me, demanding I give up my rights without even a proper conversation, rubbed me the wrong way. So I dug my heels in. The first thing I did after talking to Grandma was call the family lawyer. He was actually a cousin of ours, and I'd only met him a few times growing up, but Grandma swore by him. She called him a straight shooter, which basically meant he didn't mess around with nonsense. I liked that. I didn't want drama, I just wanted to know what my rights were and where I stood in all of this. I sat down with him a few days later and he went through everything with me. My dad had left behind a decent amount of assets, some savings, property, a few investments here and there. It wasn't like he was rolling in it, but it was more than I expected from someone who had basically ghosted me for most of my life. The part that got me was how much of this was a surprise. I knew nothing about his life after he left. The lawyer said the second wife had been living pretty well, and now that my dad was gone, she wanted to hold on to everything. So what do? I asked the lawyer, sitting in his stuffy office, feeling a little out of place. I didn't know anything about legal stuff, especially something like inheritance. I mean, this wasn't exactly something we learned about in school. Well, he said, adjusting his glasses and looking through some papers, you have a claim to half of your father's assets as his biological child. You're entitled to that unless you choose to waive your rights. I shook my head. I'm not waiving anything. He smiled a little. I didn't think so. But the other side, meaning your father's wife, is likely to contest it. This could get messy. I didn't really care if it got messy. I wasn't going to let her bully me out of what was mine. But I had to think of Grandma too. She was still recovering from everything with Grandpa, and I didn't want to drag her into some legal battle. But when I talked to her about it, she was all for me standing my ground. You deserve this, Jenny, she said firmly. After everything you've been through, don't let that woman take what's yours. So, that was it. We were in. The lawyer filed the necessary paperwork, and it wasn't long before the second wife's lawyer got in touch with mine. Apparently, she wasn't happy about me staking a claim and was prepared to fight. I tried not to think too much about it, but it was hard. I'd come home from work every day, wondering if there'd be another call, another piece of paperwork, something else to deal with. It started to consume a lot of my time, which I guess is what legal stuff does. Then, one day, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and Grandma was out running errands. I opened the door, and there she was, my dad's wife, standing right on my doorstep. Can we talk? She asked, looking all stressed out, like this whole situation was wearing her down. I didn't really want to, but I figured I'd hear her out. All right, I said, stepping aside so she could come in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Grandma and I had talked about everything just weeks before. It felt weird, like I was letting the enemy into my house, but I was curious about what she had to say. I know this must be strange for you, she started, fidgeting with her hands. You didn't have a relationship with your father, so why are you pushing this? Her tone wasn't aggressive, but it was clear she was trying to guilt me into backing down. I wasn't having it. I didn't have a relationship with him because he left me, I said, keeping my voice steady. But that doesn't mean I don't have a right to what he left behind. She sighed. But I was his wife. I was there for him when no one else was. I'm not saying you don't deserve something, she replied, but I'm his daughter, and I'm not giving up my rights just because it's inconvenient for you. Her face tightened. Inconvenient? You have no idea what this has been like for me. Losing him, dealing with all of this, and now this inheritance battle. You don't even need the money. I felt my blood boil a little at that. How did she know what I needed? She didn't know my life, didn't know the struggles Grandma and I had gone through. You don't know what I need, I said firmly. This isn't just about the money, it's about what's fair. She didn't like that answer, but she didn't push back as hard as I thought she would. Instead, she just looked tired. I just want this to be over, she muttered. Well, it'll be over when we settle this properly, I said, not backing down. I'm not giving in just to make things easier for you. There was a long silence after that. She stared down at the table, and I could tell she was trying to figure out what to say next, but whatever she was thinking, she kept it to herself. After a few more minutes of awkward silence, she stood up. I hope you reconsider, she said, her voice flat, like she knew I wouldn't. I didn't say anything as she left, just watched her walk out the door, feeling this weird mix of anger and confusion. I didn't want to fight with her, but I wasn't going to let her push me around either. When Grandma got home later, I told her about the visit. She just shook her head. She's desperate, Grandma said, but don't let that change your mind. You're doing the right thing. I hoped she was right. I didn't like how things were playing out, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let anyone take advantage of me. Not now, not ever again. So, after the visit from my dad's wife, things got even more complicated. The legal stuff was already in motion, and I knew we weren't backing down. I didn't hear from her again directly, but my lawyer sure did. He started getting all these aggressive letters from her side, trying to push for a quick settlement, basically trying to get me to give up. But I wasn't budging. The thing is, this whole situation had started to wear on me. I wasn't sleeping great, and every time the phone rang, I'd get this knot in my stomach, worried it was more drama about the inheritance. Grandma kept telling me to stay strong, but I could tell she was getting tired too. We didn't have the luxury to ignore it. Every day felt like there was a new letter, a new request from their lawyer, trying to get me to give up, and I was starting to feel like I was stuck in a never-ending battle. Then, out of nowhere, my lawyer called me one afternoon while I was at work. "We've got a problem," he said, his voice all tense. I immediately felt my stomach drop. "What now?" I asked, already bracing for the worst. "She's contesting your claim," he explained. "She's saying that your father didn't want you to get anything, that he specifically wanted it all to go to her." I was stunned. "What? How can she say that? There's no will that says that, right?" He sighed. "Right, but she's claiming that was his intent, that he just never got around to putting it in writing." I couldn't believe it. It felt like every time I thought things were starting to settle, they found a new way to stir it all up again. "So, what do we do now?" I asked, feeling more frustrated than anything. "We fight it," he said simply. "She can claim whatever she wants, but unless she's got solid proof, it's not going to hold up in court. It's a scare tactic, plain and simple." I nodded. Even though he couldn't see me, I knew he was right, but it didn't make it any easier to deal with. Every step of this process was just dragging out, making everything more exhausting. Weeks passed, and we kept going back and forth with their lawyers. At one point, they even tried to say I wasn't really his daughter. Yeah, seriously, they were that desperate to get me out of the picture. I couldn't believe the lengths they were going to just to keep me from getting what was mine. I remember sitting down with Grandma one night, feeling completely drained. "I don't even know why I'm doing this anymore," I told her, slumping down on the couch. Grandma gave me this look, like she knew exactly how I was feeling. "You're doing this because it's the right thing," she said, her voice firm. "Don't let them bully you out of what's yours. Your father might not have been in your life, but that doesn't mean you don't deserve your share." She was right, but it was hard to keep that in mind when it felt like the fight was never going to end. Still, I kept going. We filed responses, showed up to meetings, and basically just kept pushing forward. Then, one day, I got a call from my lawyer that changed everything. "They're offering a settlement," he said, his tone surprised. "A settlement?" I repeated, not quite believing it. "What kind of settlement?" "They're offering to split everything 50-50, no further contest," he explained. "They'll drop all their claims and you'll get half of the estate." I sat there, stunned. After all the fighting, all the back and forth, they were finally willing to settle. I didn't know what to say at first. Part of me felt like maybe I should have kept pushing, maybe I should have held out for more, but the other part of me was just relieved that this might finally be over. "What do you think?" I asked him. "I think it's a fair offer," he said. "It's what you were entitled to from the start, and it's better than dragging this through court for another year." I nodded. "Okay, let's take it." When I told Grandma about the settlement, she looked relieved too. "I'm proud of you," she said, smiling at me. "You stood your ground. That's what matters." And just like that, it was over. The paperwork was filed, and within a few weeks, the estate was officially divided. I didn't feel the rush of victory or triumph that I thought I might. It was more like this quiet relief, like a weight I'd been carrying around for months had finally been lifted. We got our share, and it was enough to take care of the bills, put some savings away, and finally let Grandma retire from all those part-time jobs she'd been working. That was the best part of all of this. She didn't have to struggle anymore, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like things were going to be okay. I thought a lot about my dad after everything was settled. Part of me still couldn't believe how things had played out. He wasn't a part of my life, hadn't been there for me or Grandma, but in the end, he'd left something behind. Maybe it wasn't intentional, maybe he never meant for me to get anything, but it didn't really matter anymore. I had my life, and I had my family, my real family, the ones who had always been there for me. When I looked at Grandma finally resting after years of hard work, I knew we had made the right choice. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about standing up for ourselves and not letting anyone take advantage of us. My dad's wife might have wanted it all, but in the end, we got what we deserved, and that was enough for me. It's funny how things change after everything calms down. After all the drama with the inheritance was finally over, life kind of just moved on. I thought I'd feel different, like I'd have this big moment where I'd finally be able to relax and breathe, and I did sort of, but not in the way I expected. After we got our share of the inheritance, I focused on making sure Grandma was taken care of. That was always the goal, really. I wanted her to be comfortable, to not have to worry about money or bills or any of that anymore. She'd worked so hard her whole life, especially after Grandpa got sick, and now she didn't have to anymore. That alone made all the stress and fights worth it. But honestly, once everything settled, I found myself feeling kind of empty. It's weird, right? I'd spent so much time fighting, pushing through all the lawyer stuff, and thinking about my dad and his wife that when it was all done, I didn't really know what to do with myself. I guess part of me had always been waiting for some kind of closure, like maybe I'd get some answers about why my dad left, or what his life had been like after he disappeared. But none of that ever came. There was no big revelation, no final piece of the puzzle that made everything make sense. He was just gone, and that was that. One day, Grandma and I were sitting on the porch, just watching the sun go down. It was one of those quiet moments where neither of us said much, but I knew we were both thinking about everything that had happened. "You did good, Jenny," she said out of nowhere, her voice soft but firm. I looked over at her and smiled. "Thanks, Grandma." She nodded and then said something I didn't expect. "It's time for you to start thinking about yourself now. You've been taking care of everyone else for so long, but you've got a whole life ahead of you." I didn't really know what to say to that. She was right, of course. I had spent so much time worrying about everyone else, I hadn't really stopped to think about what I wanted. But now, for the first time, I felt like maybe I could.